Right, you heard my comments at the top of the show in my editorial, quoting from statements from the renowned Canadian economist and energy expert Professor Vaclav Smil, pouring a fair amount of cold water on net zero. Here's another one. Speaking at last week's investment conference, Dr. Smil pointed out that it took us, the world, 100 years to go from wood to 50% coal, another 100 years to go from zero oil to about 40% oil. And then he went on and said it's taken us so far, about 70 years, to go from no gas or zero gas to about 25% gas. And here we are wanting to radically upend the way we power our world and live our lives in less than 30 years. Let's bring in my next guest, Executive Director of the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater, for some analysis. He joins me now from Sydney. All right, Nick, big net zero promise from the Prime Minister at the top of the year, said, look, I'm going to get into it, but we won't ever do anything without Australians knowing what it will cost. Yet today, the announcement's there, no costings, no idea what it'll do to the economy, no modelling publicly available, and a lot of heavy lifting from Australia. We're only 1% of the problem, yet all these heavy emitters, not only are they not signing up, they're not even going to the Glasgow conference. How on earth is a Conservative government doing something like this?
Well, there's a big question mark over the Glasgow conference, I think, with, people like the Chinese are obviously not taking it very seriously at all. So as a global initiative, I think it's extremely problematic at this stage. But what's the government to do here? Well, in the end, it has to take a pragmatic solution, one that looks at the investment market. And as you know, all the investment dollars are going towards this net zero idea. As for the costings, Peter, well, I just don't think you can do a meaningful costing of what would happen beyond 2030 to 2030 and 2050. There's too many unknowns. And the biggest unknown is, what technology will be available. And governments can't dictate technology. They can make the settings right so that the companies will invest in it, and there is a lot of money going into this because it's a very rich prize at the end of it. But this net zero 2050 it can only surely be based on the expectation we will have new technologies
the Prime Minister,
after 2030.
Then I agree with you on that technology point. I mean, the International Energy Agency says most of what's needed to get to net zero isn't even invented yet. One of the proven technologies, nuclear, Morrison's taken off the table. How can the Prime Minister, though, say back in February at the National Press Club in his speech he won't go there without costings available, knowing what it will cost the Australian economy? We know at the last election he pilloried Bill Shorten for having an uncosted commitment on climate change. Here he is, he goes to Glasgow on Thursday in the same boat.
Well, I think in the end we've had to jump into line with every other country and just, it's a statement, right? Zero 2050. The governments that are making those commitments now are not going to be around probably in 10 years' time, let alone, nearly 30 years' time. So that's why the government, I think the federal government held back, because they didn't want to make empty promises. But as I say, they have committed to at least the idea now.
But they make one anyway, Nick. They make one anyway.
Well, it's if you look at it as an aspiration, and if you look at it and with I think reasonable certainty that there's so much money now.
Nick,
you look at it with a reasonable. Okay, you look at it with the reasonable expectation that there will be technology breakthroughs. We're investing in them. You already talked about one today, nuclear, which is well advanced, and I don't think we haven't ruled that off the table. We should not rule that off the table.
Has.
It's in the technology roadmap. It's a possibility, but right now, of course, as you know, it's not. Nobody can invest in nuclear because we have laws that say as much. Now, should we revisit those?
Look, you're doing a valiant job, Nick Cater. You're doing a valiant job. But I mean, if you look at the British modelling,
Peter, I have to.
The British government's put its modelling out there ahead of the Glasgow summit. In its modelling, it's saying there will be, in our dollars, not in pounds, but in our dollars, a carbon tax of $295 per tonne by 2050. Now, Julia Gillard's carbon tax, I was there, I remember, at $23 a tonne. Are Australians being told about the carbon price required in this country? No, they're not. By 2050, that's a problem too.
I think the important thing in what's been announced so far, Peter, is there's been no change to 2030, and you and I know how important that is. We know the Fisher report, which looked at this 3 years ago. The cost of going to a 45% target, which was Labor's target then, is horrendous. Now they've kept it there, so it's back-ended. The expectation is the technology will come in from 2030, 2040. And it'll have a fighting chance of getting there. But I think the other important thing, which I have to say, Peter, that nobody's talking about for some reason, nobody is talking about the tremendous potential we have in this country for carbon sequestration and the way the demand is going to offset carbon. That is a huge market. And if we get the settings right, as you know, in government, Tony Abbott started the ball rolling with some of this, and it's a very effective way of getting the carbon back in balance. We have to start talking about that, but unfortunately, the whole UN process is built around one thing, and that's stopping emissions, which is it's one side of the corner, it's one side of the bank balance. We should be looking at how we can use that carbon productively to improve our soils and our farming.
Yeah, I just think you don't sign up to something that you can't cost, you can't hand on heart tell the Australian people what it will do to their household incomes and to small business in particular who can't pass it through. I'll go back to that British modelling that I was talking about, because the Telegraph newspaper in the UK over the weekend, analysis from the Climate Change Committee, this is the agency that's advising their government on net zero. If you look at the modelling, they've got all these projections about wind. Now, one of the projections about wind is that by 2050, there'll just be 7 days only that the turbines fall below 10% of the total output. Some people go, oh, that's fantastic. We know we can rely on wind all the way out to 2050. Except right now, we already know there's been 65 of those sorts of days in the UK. And in 2016, there were 78 of those days. So this modelling, Nick, is extraordinary. It doesn't stack up.
Yeah.
We're all expected to back in these false promises come Glasgow.
Well, if you're building your hopes on getting there through wind and solar, you're kidding, right? I mean, that's just not going to happen. These are technologies that are going to look like the horse and buggy, one hopes, in 30 years' time. Unfortunately, there's a lot of investment going into that. I mean, I think Britain is going through a bit of a shock at the moment. They've suddenly realised that wind and solar can't be relied upon. They're not the solutions, Peter. You can get some way with those, but you've got to look at all sorts of backup systems. We've got to make the next leap. I mean, we've got to support gas right now, and that's a terrific way to reduce emissions and also have a reliable supply. And then we've got to start looking at hydrogen. I think nuclear. I mean, we don't know, but I mean, from everything I see, the nuclear is the technology is changing and be very useful. But look, I think anything that's built on wind and solar is just fiction.
Nick Cater, thank you for your time. Well, if you don't understand it, don't vote for it. If you do understand it, you won't vote for it.